Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity to address the House this afternoon. Beginning in 2013, I began discussing how our economic recovery was subpar in comparison to post-World War II recoveries. That's in part due to, as I argued, the wet blanket of the avalanche of new regulatory costs imposed by the previous administration. Since the Congress has a poor track record of regularly enacting all of our appropriations bills, funding the government, and directing agency priorities, the administrative state, that unelected portion of our government, has expanded in authority and filled that void. Now, the House turned a corner this year, Mr. Speaker, by passing all 12 spending bills fully vetted through our committees prior to September 30, 2017. Sadly, only the first time since 2010. Further, it's been more than 21 years since Congress has passed all 12 funding bills and had them signed into law before the start of a new fiscal year. Likewise, the Supreme Court, in their case Chevron USA versus the Natural Resources Defense Council back in 1984, set up a concept now referred to as the Chevron deference. This, too, has empowered the unelected big government Washington authorities in deferring to their authority rather than the people's Congress. This has further emasculated the Article I powers of the Constitution. I disagree with this concept of Chevron deference, and before he died, Justice Scalia regretted his defense of Chevron deference and said that it in fact contravened the separation of powers. This combination of the Chevron deference, the lack of regular, predictable oversight and appropriations, have resulted in this wet blanket of a growing leviathan of centralized federal power, negating state authorities protected under the 10th Amendment and curbing freedom for our families and individuals. Noted New York lawyer and author Philip Howard calls this the rule of nobody. In his 2014 book, Howard argues that our administrative state is wearing our people out. The process is devoid of human judgment and common sense. Many of us in the Congress are pushing back, insisting that the VA Accountability Act, a shocking idea, that bad employees should be fired. And through the public oversight of our committees or in my own Golden Fleece Awards, that we demand accountability of the personnel of the federal government and common sense in the application of our policies. Howard recalls the U.S. Open Golf Championship back in 2011 out at Bethesda, Maryland, when county officials shut down a children's lemonade stand near the course because it didn't have a vendor's license, Mr. Speaker. So this mindless box-checking approach is not limited just to the Beltway's federal mandarins. So enters President Trump, our new president. Last year, I wrote then President-elect Trump asking him to create a regulatory relief task force to address the overly burdensome regulations from our federal agencies that, in my view, has hurt over the past decade our economic growth, our job growth, our productivity, and hence our wage growth. In February of 2017, President Trump ordered federal agencies to create a regulatory reform task force to identify rules within their agency that needed elimination or modification. I rise today to recognize the improvements in the regulatory process in the past year and the significant reductions in cost to the economy as a result. I commend the new administration for seeking to continue this momentum into 2018 with the recent release of its regulatory plan and agenda for 2018. As Phil Howard has demonstrated, and we experience daily, the federal administrative state is lacking in accountability. It's not just vast and costly, it's unnecessarily intrusive into the everyday lives of hardworking Americans. In Arkansas, we've seen agency regulations that have had devastating economic impacts on our farmers, small businesses, nonprofits, schools, colleges, universities, and state government. President Trump set the proper tone for reining in this regulatory state by issuing an executive order in the first 10 days of taking office, directing agencies to eliminate 2 existing regulations for each new one issued. Common sense. In 2017, federal agencies have withdrawn or delayed 1,579 planned regulatory actions, leading to over $8 billion in lifetime net cost savings. In 2018, the Trump administration plans to raise the bar by issuing 448 deregulatory actions and 131 regulatory actions, a better 3-to-1 ratio, resulting in more than $9 billion in lifetime cost savings for the economy. This chart shows the annual cost of new regulations reviewed by the Office of Management and Budget every year, beginning in 2009. You can see the wet blanket that I described growing between 2009 and 2012. But you can see out at the last column, 2017, that it's actually a decline, a $570 million reduction in the cost of new regulations proposed by Washington. During 2017 here in Congress, we've passed 13 Congressional Review Acts, 11 of which President Trump signed into law this year. By repealing these 11 damaging, large rules, the economy will save some $10 billion over the next 20 years. These savings and cuts put the control back in the hands of the American people and ensure that more accountability and much-needed transparency to the rulemaking process is assured, while providing that local businesses, local farmers, and communities have relief. Also, we're working with the administration to right-size regulatory costs through the use of cost-benefit analysis and asserting our Article I oversight authority. Thus, Congress is working through our committee process also to lower and remove the costs and burden of that wet blanket of an overburdened regulatory state. Naturally, this cost-benefit work must be done responsibly by balancing labor and capital, clean air and water, energy security, a clean energy future, safe banks, protected consumers. All that is the responsibility of our elected members in the House and Senate and their oversight of the executive. I commend President Trump for cutting the red tape in Washington, giving control back to our states, local communities, and hardworking taxpayers.